It was 24th December 1999, a day that should have been like any other for the passengers and crew of Indian Airlines flight IC-814. The flight, scheduled to depart from Kathmandu's Tribhuvan International Airport to New Delhi, was a routine journey. The 11 crew members on board were accustomed to their work, ensuring the 179 passengers settled in for what was expected to be a short and uneventful flight. Many had already made plans for dinner upon reaching Delhi, oblivious to the ordeal that lay ahead. Seated among them were five terrorists of Harkat ul Mujahideen, an Islamic terrorist group based in Pakistan, ready to execute their sinister plan. Security at the Kathmandu airport was notoriously lax, with minimal scrutiny of passengers and luggage. Exploiting this vulnerability, the hijackers had managed to smuggle weapons aboard. At 4 p.m. IST, the aircraft initiated its takeoff, sealing the fate of its 190 occupants. As the plane entered Indian airspace at around 16:39 IST, the crew began serving refreshments. Chief Steward Anil Sharma had just delivered drinks to the pilots when chaos erupted. A masked man, wielding a revolver and a grenade, accosted Sharma, putting a gun to his head and demanding access to the cockpit. At 16:53 IST, the pilots received the chilling announcement. The plane had been hijacked. The message was relayed to Delhi Air Traffic Control at 16:56 IST. The hijackers initially wanted to take the aircraft to Pakistan, but Pakistani authorities denied landing permission at Lahore. With fuel running dangerously low, the plane was eventually granted clearance to land at Amritsar, India at 1844 IST. The pilots immediately requested refueling, as the hijackers threatened dire consequences if their demands were not met. However, delays in refueling led to violent repercussions. Two passengers, Satnam Singh and Rupin Katyal, were stabbed multiple times, with Katyal later succumbing to his injuries. With no immediate refueling in sight and fearing further violence, the pilot took off from Amritsar at 1947 IST without clearance to do so. The flight then headed toward Lahore, where Pakistani authorities initially denied permission to land, even switching off runway lights to deter the aircraft. The pilot, left with no option, threatened to crash land on a highway due to critical fuel levels. This ultimatum forced the Pakistani ATC to grant permission, and the plane touched down in Lahore at 20:01 IST. The hijackers considered releasing women and children, but Pakistani authorities disallowed it. Meanwhile, diplomatic efforts from the Indian High Commission to prevent the aircraft from taking off again fell on deaf ears. The plane was refueled and departed Lahore at 22:32 IST, heading westward. The hijackers intended to land in Kabul, but the lack of night landing facilities forced them to reconsider. Most Gulf countries refused to grant airspace clearance. Eventually, the aircraft was permitted to land at Al Minhat Air Base in Dubai at 1:32 IST on December 25. Negotiations between UAE authorities and the hijackers resulted in the release of 27 passengers in exchange for fuel. The body of Rupin Katyal was also offloaded, while Satnam Singh and the released passengers were flown back to India later that day. Indian efforts to stall the plane in Dubai were unsuccessful, and it took off at 6:20 IST, finally landing at Kandahar, Afghanistan at 8:33 IST. At the time, Kandahar was under Taliban control, complicating Indian efforts to negotiate with the hijackers. The Taliban, despite claims of neutrality, deployed armed forces around the aircraft, raising suspicions that they were supporting the hijackers. Some analysts believe this move was to prevent an Indian military operation. During the captivity, passengers endured harsh conditions with limited food and water. And to add salt to the wounds, the hijackers frequently used the aircraft's public announcement system to persuade the passengers to convert to Islam. Meanwhile, Indian negotiators, including current NSA Ajit Doval, faced immense difficulties in dealing with the Taliban, as India had not formally recognized the Taliban and had no previous contact with them. Doval later revealed that the hijackers had received active support from Pakistan's ISI, ensuring their safe exit from Afghanistan. Later, the Taliban officials would refuse Indian forces to attempt a covert operation and would surround the plane by tanks so that military intervention from Indian side could not happen, further raising suspicion that they were actively involved with the hijackers. On December 27, a Taliban official told a local newspaper that the hijackers had to either leave Afghanistan or surrender. Indian officials interpreted this statement as an understanding that Taliban officials would arrest the hijackers if they surrendered and began to negotiate with them concerning their demands. The hijackers' final demand was the release of three terrorists, Masood Azhar, Omar Sheikh, and Mushtaq Zarkar, two of them Pakistani nationals and one British national. The three prisoners were flown to Kandahar and handed over to the hijackers, leading to the eventual release of the hostages. India explicitly conveyed to the Taliban that it expected the Taliban to arrest and act against the perpetrators. However, instead of arresting the hijackers and the three prisoners who had been handed over to them, the Taliban authorities gave them 10 hours to leave the country and drove them to the Afghanistan Pakistan border. The Taliban facilitated their escape to the Afghanistan Pakistan border, ensuring their safe passage. In the years that followed, the released terrorists played pivotal roles in orchestrating numerous terror attacks against India and even contributed to the 9/11 attacks in the United States. Nearly 2 decades later, at least two of the five hijackers met their end in Pakistan, killed by unknown gunmen. One of them was the very man responsible for Rupin Katyal's murder. The Kandahar hijacking remains one of the most harrowing episodes in aviation history. It was a wake-up call for the Indian establishment to have a hard look at its standard operating procedures during such crises. It was also a lesson for the deep state of the West that if you keep snakes as your pets, they would end up biting you eventually.